Hello there, and welcome. I am glad you are here. Maybe the day has felt long, or perhaps you simply enjoy closing your eyes while quiet ideas drift past at an unhurried pace. Either way, there is nothing to solve tonight, and nothing you need to hold on to too tightly. You can let your shoulders loosen a little. You can let your jaw soften. You can allow each breath to arrive and leave in its own patient rhythm, without needing to count or control it. This is only a gentle walk through a very distant part of the human story. Tonight, we will move softly through the world of early humans. We will notice where they rested, how they traveled, what they ate, how they made tools, and how they slowly learned to live in changing landscapes. Some details may stay with you. Others may fade before the next sentence arrives. That is perfectly fine. There is no need to keep track of everything. You can simply follow the mood of the journey, the feeling of very old campfires, open plains, quiet shelters, and long generations passing beneath wide skies. If your mind drifts for a while, let it drift. If a detail returns later, let it return on its own. We are only here to move gently through the past, with no pressure to remember more than your resting mind wishes to keep. The story of early humans is not a sharp line with a clear beginning and end. It is more like a wide horizon, filled with small traces, quiet changes, and long stretches of time. So we will take it slowly, one calm section at a time, beginning with the earliest origins and the deep sense of time surrounding them. If we begin at the beginning, we do not arrive at a single doorway or a single moment. The story of early humans opens very slowly, across immense spans of time, mostly in Africa, where many ancestral forms appeared, changed, and gradually gave way to others. It is a quiet kind of beginning, spread across valleys, plains, lakeshores, and woodlands that no longer look exactly as they once did. Rather than one first human stepping forward into the light, there were many populations, each carrying small changes, each living ordinary days, and each becoming part of a much larger pattern. Scientists pieced together this distant pattern through fossils, stone tools, footprints, hearth remains, and the long patience of excavation. A fragment of skull, a worn tooth, or the shape of a chipped stone can reveal something about age, diet, movement, or skill. These clues are often small, and they are never complete, yet they allow a broad picture to emerge. In a way, the study of early humans is the study of traces that almost disappeared. It reminds us that even the faintest remains can still speak, if someone listens closely enough and with enough care. The phrase early humans includes more than one kind of being. It can refer to ancestors in our own direct line, but also to close relatives whose lives unfolded beside or before ours. Some groups overlapped in time. Some lived far apart. Some vanished without leaving many descendants, while others contributed to later populations more clearly. Human evolution was never a neat ladder with one rung after another. It was more like a branching river system, with channels that widened, narrowed, merged, and sometimes quietly dried away, leaving only a few visible marks in the ground. Across these long ages, climate shifted again and again. Wet periods opened grasslands and lakes. Drier periods changed plant life, altered animal routes, and made some places more difficult to inhabit. Ice ages came later in parts of the world beyond Africa, while warmer intervals created different opportunities. Early humans did not live against a still backdrop. They lived in landscapes that changed over generations, and those changes shaped movement, diet, shelter, and survival. A cooling wind, a drying river, or the return of seasonal rain could influence the course of countless ordinary decisions. One of the steady patterns visible in the record is gradual change in body and brain over time. Some early human species developed larger brains than earlier ancestors, though brain size alone does not explain everything about behavior. Even so, larger brains appear alongside changing tool use, wider adaptation, and more complex social patterns. These shifts did not happen all at once. They unfolded so slowly that no one living through them would have felt the world turning beneath their feet. Generation by generation, small differences accumulated, and what seems large in hindsight would have felt almost invisible in daily life. Dating this deep history requires many careful methods. Archaeologists study soil layers, volcanic ash, chemical signatures, and the age of nearby materials to place fossils and artifacts in time. Sometimes a site can be dated closely. Sometimes the result is a broad range rather than a precise year. Still, these methods create a framework, and within that framework, early human history becomes less vague. We begin to see which species lived at roughly the same time, which tool traditions lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, and which discoveries belong to much later chapters in the human journey. What is perhaps most restful about this ancient story is its scale. Human origins stretch so far back that the pace itself becomes soothing. Nothing changes in an instant. There are no sudden leaps that erase what came before. Instead, there is continuity, experimentation, adaptation, and long endurance. A hand learns to shape stone a little better. A population settles into a region and then moves on when conditions shift. A new form emerges from older forms, not with noise, but with the slow patience of living things meeting the world around them. Many discoveries have also reminded researchers that the older picture of human evolution was too simple. New fossils sometimes shift a date earlier than expected. A jawbone found in one place may suggest a population traveled farther than once believed. Genetic evidence can reveal ancient relationships long after bones alone seem silent. Each finding adds detail, but it also adds humility. The deeper the record becomes, the more complex the story appears. Early humans were not a single procession toward the present. They were many lives, many groups, and many quiet adaptations unfolding under changing skies. It is easy, from a modern distance, to imagine prehistory as a blur. Yet the people within it did not live in a blur. They woke to morning light, followed paths to water, watched weather gather, listened for animals, cared for children, and looked for safe places to rest. Their lives moved at the scale of days and seasons, even while their history moved at the scale of millennia. Perhaps that is part of what makes this subject feel gentle. The vastness belongs to us as observers, but the lived experience was always immediate, practical, and close to the ground. Sometimes a single site gathers many of these threads together. Tools lie near animal bones. Fragments of skull or teeth appear in the same broad layers of earth. Signs of repeated occupation suggest that a place remained useful through changing conditions. Yet even the richest site is still only a narrow window. Many shelters vanished without trace. Many bodies were never preserved. Many generations passed across landscapes that left almost nothing behind. This partial quality is part of what gives the subject its softness. We are not hearing the whole song of the past, only a few quiet notes that still linger. That incompleteness has shaped the discipline itself. Researchers often work with probabilities rather than absolutes, with careful comparisons rather than final declarations. A fossil may resemble one group in some features and another in different features. A dating range may be refined years later when methods improve. New discoveries can rearrange older models without entirely erasing them. In another sense, the science of human origins mirrors the patience of the subject. It advances through measured revision, letting the story widen slowly rather than forcing it into certainty before the evidence is ready. There is also a calming perspective that comes from considering how much time early humans inhabited the Earth before anything like recorded history existed. For almost the entire span of human existence, there were no books, no monuments with dates, and no names carried forward in writing. There were only living communities moving through weather, seasons, and changing terrain. This means the deepest part of our story belongs not to kings or empires, but to ordinary survival. It belongs to footsteps, campfires, careful hands, and attention to the land. That older scale can make modern urgency feel much smaller and less fixed. Perhaps that is why the earliest human past often feels more spacious than distant. It slows the mind. It asks us to notice continuity instead of spectacle, process instead of abrupt transformation. The earliest chapters are built from repetition, and repetition has a restful quality. A population adapts. A climate shifts. A route is followed again. A tool shape endures. Across immense time, these modest recurrences become history. So even at the edge of what can be known, the ancient human story offers something steady, the sense that our beginnings emerge gradually, with no need to rush. To sit with this beginning is to accept a different pace of understanding. The past does not open all at once. It reveals itself in layers, and those layers invite patience from anyone willing to study them. That patience feels fitting, because early human life itself unfolded through long continuities rather than sudden certainty. Even the gaps in the record contribute to that feeling. They keep the horizon open and remind us that the earliest human story is something to approach gently, with room left for quiet uncertainty. That quiet uncertainty is not a flaw in the story. It is part of its depth, and part of what makes these beginnings feel so wide. So when we speak of origins and time, we are really speaking of patience. Early humans emerged within long natural processes and responded to a changing world without ever seeing the full arc we can now trace. Their story asks us to slow down, to release the need for a single beginning, and to accept a more spacious view. In that wide and ancient frame, human history begins not with certainty, but with layers, fragments, and long continuity. And from that calm beginning, we can move gently onward, from time itself to the bodies that carried these early people across the earth. Long before written records, before cities, roads, or walls, the human body was being shaped by repeated movement through open land. Upright walking was one of the most important changes. It freed the hands, lifted the eyes, and changed the way early humans met the world around them. The spine, hips, legs, and feet slowly took on forms suited to standing and traveling across distance. This did not make early life easy, but it created new possibilities. A person could carry food, hold a tool, gather materials, or bring a child along while still moving steadily through the landscape. Walking well mattered. For many early humans, survival depended on reaching water, returning to shelter, following herds, and exploring broad territories without wasting too much energy. Long legs and balanced posture helped with this patient travel. There is something quietly familiar in that image of a small group moving under daylight, not in haste, but with purpose. Their bodies were not built for comfort in the modern sense. They were built for endurance, rhythm, and repeated effort, for the kind of days shaped by distance, attention, and gradual exertion from morning into evening. Hands changed too, and with them came remarkable subtlety. The human hand became capable of a careful grip, able to hold and shape stone with precision. A hand could scrape a hide, lift a child, gather seeds, or turn a sharpened flake against wood. This combination of strength and control helped early humans interact with their environment in increasingly flexible ways. It reminds us that the body is never just a passive container for the mind. It is an active partner in thought, memory, and skill, learning the world by touching, carrying, and altering it. Different environments shaped bodies in different ways. Over long stretches of time, populations living in colder regions often tended toward broader bodies that held warmth more effectively, while other environments favored other proportions. Height, build, and facial structure likely varied across species and across places. There was no single early human form. There were many bodies, each responding to inheritance, climate, diet, and daily activity. In a way, this quiet variety is part of the larger human story. Adaptation did not produce one perfect design. It produced forms suited, for a time, to particular worlds. Teeth and jaws also tell a slow story. Earlier ancestors often had heavier chewing demands, while later changes in diet, food preparation, and tool use may have altered those demands over time. Teeth preserve well, so they often become some of the clearest evidence in the fossil record. A worn molar can suggest the texture of food. The shape of a jaw can hint at changes in chewing muscles or facial form. These details may seem small, but they offer a calm reminder that even eating leaves a history in the body, written gradually through use. Brain size increased in several human groups, though not in a perfectly simple sequence. Larger brains are often discussed because they may relate to planning, memory, communication, and technical skill. Yet the story is more balanced than that. A larger brain alone does not explain cooperation or care. It does not guarantee imagination. Still, over time, increasing brain size appears alongside richer tool traditions and more adaptable behavior. Perhaps the most useful way to think about this is not as a sudden leap in intelligence, but as a broadening capacity for noticing patterns and responding to them. Daily life kept the body in constant use. Early humans walked, climbed, crouched, carried, dug, watched, and sometimes ran. Rest was real and necessary, yet the ordinary day likely involved much more physical exertion than many modern lives. Feet had to manage stones, mud, roots, and heat. Shoulders had to lift and throw. Backs had to bear loads and recover from them. The body was part of the environment rather than separate from it. It learned from terrain, weather, and repetition, becoming strong in some ways not through exercise routines, but through the simple demands of living. The shoulder deserves its own quiet attention. Human shoulders allow a wide range of motion, and this flexibility may have supported throwing, reaching, and fine manipulation. A thrown spear, a lifted branch, or a careful strike with a stone tool all depend on coordinated movement through the arm and torso. Small anatomical differences can open large behavioral possibilities. In another part of the body, the foot arch and aligned big toe helped make long walking more efficient. These changes seem technical when described in isolation, but together they formed a body able to travel, work, and adapt in subtle ways. What is striking is how slowly all of this occurred. Evolution does not redesign a species in a single dramatic turn. Traits spread or fade over generations, always within the living flow of births, losses, meals, seasons, and movement. A child may resemble parents closely while still carrying slight differences. Over time, those differences matter. Yet no individual ever feels themselves becoming part of a major evolutionary pattern. The body simply continues, doing what it can in the conditions it meets. That quiet pace makes the whole process feel less like invention and more like drifting adjustment. Breathing, endurance, and pacing would have shaped daily experience as much as bones and joints did. To cross open terrain under sun or cold wind requires more than strong legs. It requires rhythm, the ability to move without exhausting the body too quickly. A group traveling together would likely settle into a common pace, adjusting for children, older adults, or the roughness of ground beneath their feet. Such motion is not dramatic. It is measured and sustained. Yet in that measured movement we can sense one of the deepest strengths of early humans, the ability to keep going steadily through long and uncertain days. Hands also linked work with care. The same fingers that shape tools may have gathered seeds from grass heads, arranged bedding in a shelter, cleaned a wound, or rested gently on the shoulder of another person. A capable hand does many kinds of work, some technical, some tender. This matters because anatomy is not only about labor or survival in the narrow sense. It is also about relationship. Human bodies met the world together. They lifted, carried, repaired, soothed, and taught. When we imagine early hands, we are imagining not only toolmakers, but caregivers, companions, and attentive members of a group. Bodies recorded hardship as well as skill. Fossils sometimes show injuries, worn joints, or signs of strain that built up over years of use. Teeth cracked, backs labored, feet met rough ground over and over again. Yet these traces do more than suggest difficulty. They also show persistence. A healed injury means time passed after the wound. An older skeleton means a body endured many seasons. In that way, ancient bones carry a quiet dignity. They are not perfect forms. They are lived forms, marked by effort and adaptation, shaped by the practical realities of a demanding world. If we gather all these details together, the body of an early human begins to look less like a specimen and more like a way of being in the world. It was versatile rather than specialized, capable of traveling, grasping, climbing, carrying, and adjusting to many conditions. That versatility may be one of the great inheritances of human evolution. It did not solve every challenge, but it allowed people to respond to many different ones with enough steadiness to survive. From such bodies, daily life flowed outward into camps, tasks, and relationships, always grounded in movement and use. Seen this way, anatomy is not abstract at all. It is the quiet history of how life was lived, step by step and task by task. Every strong foot, flexible shoulder, and careful hand reflects a world that asked much of the body and received a steady answer in return. The body becomes easier to understand when we imagine it in motion rather than in isolation. Each feature belonged to daily effort, repeated until form and function settled together over a very long time. What survived in bone was once part of breathing, walking, lifting, and enduring under open skies. It was lived anatomy, shaped by use, and by long, patient repetition. Always. So the early human body can be understood as a record of use. It shows the imprint of travel, toolmaking, climate, diet, and shared labor. Bones, joints, hands, teeth, and posture all reveal something about the worlds our ancestors inhabited. In a way, the body remembers what history forgets. It keeps traces of paths once walked and tasks once repeated until they become part of structure itself. And as we move from bodies into the places where those bodies rested, we can begin to imagine not only how early humans moved through the day, but where they settled softly when daylight came to an end. When evening came to early humans, rest depended less on comfort than on choosing a place that could hold safety for a few quiet hours. Shelter was rarely permanent in the modern sense. It could be a cave mouth, a rock overhang, a simple structure of branches, or an open camp arranged as carefully as conditions allowed. The sleeping place was part of the landscape, not sealed away from it. Wind, insects, cold ground, distant animal sounds, and the movement of firelight were all part of the atmosphere surrounding rest. Even so, people seem to have made the best peace they could with the night. Caves often catch the imagination because they preserve evidence well, but not every cave was a home, and not every group lived in one. Some caves offered shade during hot days, warmth during cold nights, and a measure of protection from wind and rain. Others may have been damp, dark, cramped, or occupied by animals. A cave had to be useful, not merely available. When archaeologists find bones, hearths, tools, and pigments inside caves, they are often seeing the remains of repeated visits rather than endless year-round occupation. The cave was one option among several, and its usefulness depended on context. Open-air camps may actually have been more common than the surviving record suggests. These camps leave fainter traces because grass, hide, wood, and woven plant material decay easily. A ring of stones, a patch of ash, or a scatter of tools may be all that remains. Yet those small clues point to ordinary places where people once slept, talked quietly, prepared food, and watched the light change. It is a calm thought that so much of human life has happened in structures that did not last. Shelter did its work for a night or a season, and then it gave itself back to weather. Simple shelters could be made from branches leaned together, from hide stretched over frames, or from local grasses laid for insulation. In colder regions, more protection would have been needed. In warmer places, shade and airflow might matter more than enclosure. The design likely changed with climate, terrain, and available materials. A family group might know how to shape a sleeping place quickly, using knowledge passed on through practice rather than formal instruction. This kind of practical skill leaves only faint evidence, yet it speaks of planning, cooperation, and an understanding of how to live with the land rather than against it. Location mattered deeply. Camps were often placed near water, near food sources, and near useful stone for tools, but still with some awareness of risk. A good place to sleep needed access and caution at the same time. Too far from resources and the group wastes energy. Too exposed and the night becomes more dangerous. There may have been preferences for elevation, visibility, drainage, or closeness to fuel for fire. In another part of camp, daily tasks would have continued around the resting place, but there was likely some informal order, a sense of where tools belonged and where bodies should settle. Fire changed shelter from mere cover into something warmer and more human in feeling. A hearth gave light, warmth, and a loose center around which people could gather. It may also have helped define sleeping space. Those nearest the fire might feel more secure, while smoke and sparks had to be managed carefully. The fire did not erase darkness. It only softened it at the edges. Beyond the light, the night remained wide and unknown. Yet a controlled flame in the middle of camp could turn an exposed place into a temporary home, a circle of watchfulness and shared presence against the surrounding dark. Some archaeological sites show repeated occupation over many years, perhaps even across generations. The same shelter area, cave entrance, or camping ground may have been returned to again and again because it offered reliable water, food access, good stone, or a defensible setting. Repeated use gives a place a kind of memory. Even without writing or maps, people would know where they had rested before, where the wind came from, where game passed nearby, and where children could stay close to the group. Place knowledge is a quiet kind of inheritance, and it may have guided movement as surely as any tool. Shelter also reveals something about social life. A sleeping place is never only physical. It reflects trust, routine, and shared habits. Who sleeps near whom? Who tends the fire? Who wakes first? Who comforts a frightened child? Who listens for distant sounds? All of this is part of the camp as much as wood and stone are. We cannot recover those exact moments, yet the arrangement of living space hints at them. Camps were likely shaped by practical care. Work areas may have been kept apart from sleeping areas. Waste may have been moved away. Objects may have been placed within easy reach. Weather would have taught many quiet lessons about where and how to rest. Wind reveals weak shelter walls very quickly. Rain tests drainage. Cold rising from the ground changes how bedding must be arranged. Over many seasons, a group would learn which materials insulate best, which locations flood, and which cave openings catch too much night air. This knowledge might never be spoken as a formal rule, yet it would settle into habit. People would know by experience where the body rests most easily, and where a camp becomes uncomfortable long before dawn. The ground itself mattered as much as the covering above it. A level patch of dry earth is very different from damp soil, loose stones, or a sloping surface that shifts the body through the night. Grasses, leaves, hides, or branches may have been gathered to soften the sleeping area, even if only a little. Such small acts of preparation deserve attention. To clear a space, smooth it, and arrange materials there is to create comfort within narrow limits. Early human rest was rarely luxurious, but that does not mean people were indifferent to comfort. They likely sought it whenever conditions allowed. Certain places may also have felt reliable in an emotional sense. A known cave entrance, a protected hollow, or a sheltered rise above open ground carries the memory of earlier safe nights. Familiarity can calm the body before sleep arrives. Returning to a place that has already proven itself may reduce uncertainty, even when conditions are still difficult. In that way, shelter is partly about trust in the landscape. A place becomes meaningful through repeated use, and that meaning may have mattered to early humans every bit as much as stone walls or branch roofs. Modern ideas of home often center on permanence, ownership, and private space. Early human shelter followed a different logic. A place was good because it worked for now, in this weather, with these people, for this portion of the journey. Its value was immediate rather than permanent. Yet this does not make it less significant. If anything, it makes each shelter feel more intimate. It existed to answer the coming night, to protect living bodies that needed warmth, closeness, and a few hours of safety before the day began again. That temporary purpose gives these ancient resting places a quiet tenderness. Even a simple sleeping place can reveal how carefully people met the dark. To arrange cover, choose ground, and keep close to warmth is to shape rest out of uncertainty. That act may have been repeated thousands of times across countless landscapes, each one modest, each one deeply human in its intention. Shelter was therefore never only structure. It was also a practice of attention, renewed at the end of each day wherever the group happened to be. Its success was measured in warmth, closeness, and the simple fact of waking safely when morning returned. That may be the oldest test of home. Safe rest before another dawn. There is a gentle humility in these shelters. They were not monuments. They did not aim to outlast time. They were made to answer the present moment, to keep cold off the skin, to offer a place to lie down, to protect a small group through one more night. Early humans probably knew that they would move on sooner or later. The shelter was part of a temporary rhythm, built, used, repaired, and then left behind. In that sense, resting places teach us something about the pace of early life. Security was real, but it was often portable, provisional, and woven from repeated acts of attention. So when we imagine the homes of early humans, it may be best not to imagine a single kind of dwelling. Instead, we can picture a range of sleeping places adapted to weather, season, and need. Some were enclosed. Some were open. Some were used briefly. Some drew people back many times. All of them belonged to a way of life in which rest was earned, space was shared, and shelter was carefully shaped from what the land could offer. From these quiet places of sleep and protection, we can now drift toward another daily concern just as steady and essential: the search for food. Food shaped the day of early humans in ways both simple and far-reaching. Much of life would have been organized around finding it, preparing it, sharing it, and remembering where it might be found again. Their diets were varied, changing with region, season, climate, and available skill. Plants, roots, seeds, nuts, fruit, insects, eggs, fish, and meat all likely played a role at different times and in different places. There was no single early human menu. Instead, there was flexibility, and within that flexibility there was knowledge, the kind that grows quietly from repeated attention to the living world. Gathering plant foods was probably one of the most constant parts of subsistence. Edible leaves, berries, nuts, seeds, tubers, and fruits may not always survive in the archaeological record, but they would have mattered deeply in everyday life. Knowing which plants nourished, which harmed, and which appeared only in a certain season was practical wisdom. Such knowledge could not be rushed. It required observation, memory, and teaching. In a way, gathering is one of the calmest human activities to imagine. Hands moving through grass, fingers testing ripeness, eyes reading subtle signs in a landscape that might seem silent to outsiders. Seasonal timing mattered. A tree heavy with fruit for a short period, a stand of nut-bearing plants, or the moment when roots were easiest to dig all would shape movement and planning. Animal migrations followed their own patterns, and the availability of water changed with rain and drought. Early humans lived within these rhythms rather than above them. A successful group would not simply know what was edible, but when it could be found and how long it would last. The year may not have been counted in formal calendars, yet it was likely known through repeated sequences of appearance, absence, and return. Roots and tubers were often valuable foods because they could remain hidden underground when other resources were less reliable. Digging sticks and simple tools may have helped people reach them. Such foods required effort, but they offered steadiness. In another setting, shorelines, rivers, and lakes could provide fish, shellfish, and other resources that returned with enough regularity to shape settlement patterns. Coasts in particular may have offered a broad pantry for groups able to read tides, stones, and shallow waters. The landscape was never just scenery. It was a store of possibilities, understood gradually through patient use. Meat likely entered the diet in more than one way. Some early humans scavenged carcasses left by predators, carefully cutting away flesh or breaking bones for marrow when danger had passed. Others hunted directly, using cooperation, observation, persistence, or weapons as technologies improved. These approaches need not be treated as opposites. A flexible group might do both when opportunities arose. The important point is that food strategy was adaptive rather than rigid. Early humans responded to circumstance. They used what the day allowed, and that practical flexibility may have mattered more than any single preferred method. Once food was obtained, it still had to be processed. Seeds might be pounded or ground. Meat might be cut, dried, or later cooked. Nuts might be cracked with stone. Plant fibers had to be separated from edible parts. Teeth and tools worked together in these routines. Preparation changed not only taste, but effort, digestion, and storage. A softer food takes less chewing. A cooked root yields more easily to the stomach. A shared meal can be divided more smoothly when cutting tools are good. These small changes ripple outward, affecting health, time use, and even the social quality of eating together. Food sharing was likely one of the foundations of group life. A successful gatherer or hunter could help sustain children, older adults, or anyone having a less successful day. Sharing smooths uncertainty. It turns individual luck into collective stability. This does not mean life was always generous or equal, but it does suggest that food often moved through social bonds rather than remaining entirely private. A meal could strengthen trust, reinforce obligation, or simply make it possible for a group to stay together. In that sense, food was never only nourishment. It was also relationship, memory, and the quiet fabric of community. Diet changed over time, just as tools and climates changed. New regions offered unfamiliar plants and animals. Better cutting technology increased access to certain foods. Fire altered texture and digestibility. Perhaps even taste itself became part of cultural knowledge, with some foods preferred, avoided, or associated with certain places and times. The record is incomplete, but it suggests wide human adaptability. Early humans were not tied to one narrow food path. They learned, adjusted, and kept watching. This capacity to notice what a landscape offered, and to use it without exhausting every possibility at once, may have been one of their deepest strengths. The search for food trained attention in very fine ways. A gatherer must notice ripeness, color, season, and location. A tracker must read movement through grass, mud, or broken branches. Someone digging roots must understand where to look and how deep to go. These are quiet forms of intelligence. They grow from repeated observation rather than sudden insight. Over time, a landscape becomes readable. One hill offers berries after rain. One stream edge hides edible plants. One coastal stretch yields shellfish when the water falls back. Such knowledge is local, patient, and built from many ordinary returns. Periods of scarcity would have sharpened that knowledge further. When one resource failed, another had to be found. A dry season, a shift in migrating animals, or a poor fruiting year could change the whole pattern of movement. In those moments, flexibility mattered more than preference. Groups that could widen their diets, remember alternate places, or share food effectively were better able to continue. Hardship was part of life, but so was resilience. The human ability to respond by adjusting rather than collapsing may be one of the reasons early populations endured such varied and changing environments. Children likely entered this world of food through gradual participation. They watched adults taste, sort, gather, cut, carry, and prepare what had been found. They learned not only what to eat, but when to trust a place, how to approach a shoreline, where roots usually hid, and why some plants were left untouched. This is more than nutritional instruction. It is the teaching of landscape itself. To learn food is to learn a region's rhythms, dangers, and possibilities. It is a practical education that begins early and settles deeply into memory because it is tied to survival. At the close of day, food also shaped atmosphere. The return to camp with gathered plants, shellfish, or meat changed the rhythm from searching to preparing, from movement to division, from uncertainty to a little temporary ease. Even a modest meal could alter the emotional tone of a group. Hunger quieted. Hands became busy in different ways. A hearth might be stirred, tools brought out, portions arranged. In that slow sequence, nourishment became social. It marked the transition from one part of the day to another and helped turn labor into shared relief. Perhaps that is why the food story feels so foundational. It touches everything at once: movement, memory, cooperation, skill, and rest. To understand what early humans ate is also to understand how closely their lives were braided into the living patterns of the places they knew best. Every meal, however simple, connected body, group, and landscape in one quiet exchange. There is something soothing in imagining these food rhythms without modern speed. No shelves were stocked in advance. No clocks hurried the meal. Instead, there was a slower intimacy with sources of nourishment. People knew where roots grew, when fruits ripened, where shellfish gathered, and how long a carcass remained safe to approach. They read the world as a living pattern of chances and limits. Hunger could be hard, of course, and scarcity was always possible. But even within that reality, the search for food required attentiveness that was steady rather than frantic, relational rather than abstract. So the food story of early humans is a story of variety, patience, and observation. It rests on gathering as much as on hunting, on memory as much as on effort, and on social sharing as much as on individual skill. Meals were part of a larger system of knowing the land and moving through it wisely. Every seed, root, shell, and cut of meat connected the body to a place and a season. And from these daily acts of finding and preparing food, it feels natural to move on to the tools that made so much of that work possible, especially in hunting, cutting, shaping, and planning ahead. Few objects bring early humans closer to us than tools. A shaped stone lying in ancient soil can still hold the memory of a hand, a strike, a decision, and a purpose. Because stone survives so well, it forms much of the visible record of early human skill. Yet these tools were part of a wider world that also included wood, hide, fiber, bone, and tasks that vanished almost completely from the ground. A stone flake is not only an object. It is a surviving piece of a larger daily rhythm, a clue to cutting, scraping, carrying, planning, and working with deliberate care. Some of the earliest stone tools were simple flakes struck from a core to create a sharp edge. They may look modest, but their usefulness was broad. A flake could slice meat, scrape plant fibers, shape wood, or clean a hide. Even a small cutting edge changes what a hand can do. It extends strength with precision. Over many thousands of years, early humans refined these methods, selecting better raw material, preparing striking surfaces, and producing shapes suited to repeated needs. Skill entered the process not as spectacle, but as economy, knowing where to hit, how hard to strike, and what edge would result. Hand axes are among the most famous of these tools, and they persisted for astonishing lengths of time. Shaped on both sides, often balanced and symmetrical, they suggest not just function but practice form. A hand axe may have been used for butchering, digging, chopping, or general heavy-duty work. Its long life in the archaeological record hints at reliability. When a design works in many settings, it tends to endure. There is something restful in that continuity. 4 generations beyond counting, similar forms appeared in different hands, across different regions, quietly linking distant people through a shared practical intelligence. Not all important tools were made of stone. Wooden spears, digging sticks, carrying poles, and simple handles may have shaped daily life just as deeply, yet most have disappeared. Rare examples of preserved wooden spears suggest that hunting technology could be more developed than stone alone implies. This is a useful reminder that the surviving record is uneven. Archaeology often sees what can last, not necessarily what mattered most. A camp might once have been full of shaped wood, woven materials, and temporary equipment that left little trace. Absence in the ground does not mean absence in life. Making a tool required more than strength. It required choosing the right material, understanding how it would fracture, and imagining a useful form before it fully existed. Some stone breaks predictably, creating sharp edges when struck at the proper angle. Learning this cannot have been entirely accidental. It had to be practiced, observed, repeated, and likely taught. A younger person could watch an older craftsperson strike a core, turn it, strike again, and test the result. In that exchange, there is already a quiet form of education. Technique lives by passing from one careful body to another. Tools were closely tied to hunting. Sharpened points and spears helped close the distance between human bodies and wary animals. Hunting itself may have taken many forms, from opportunistic kills to more coordinated efforts involving several people. Cooperation could reduce risk and improve success. Someone might track. Someone might drive an animal in a certain direction. Someone might wait. Yet tools for hunting were never only about the hunt. They also shaped everything that followed: the butchering, transport, hide work, cooking preparation, and sharing. A single successful tool could support an entire chain of tasks extending long after the moment of capture. Elsewhere in camp, tools served quieter duties. Scrapers could clean hides for clothing or bedding. Flakes could cut plant stems, shape digging sticks, or prepare fibers for binding. Hammerstones cracked nuts or broke bones for marrow. Grinding surfaces later helped process seeds and pigments. In this sense, tool use was woven into nearly every part of life. It did not stand apart as a specialized activity. It entered shelter making, food preparation, childcare, transport, and ornament. A practical tool is humble precisely because it becomes so ordinary. It disappears into routine while quietly enlarging what routine can achieve. The presence of carried tools tells us something about planning. If a group traveled with shaped stone or selected raw material, it suggests foresight. People anticipated future needs rather than waiting for every requirement to appear. This ability to think ahead, even in modest ways, changes the texture of daily life. A cutting edge kept for later means that later is already being imagined. A good stone source remembered and revisited means geography is being stored in memory. Toolmaking, then, is not just craftsmanship. It is a way of holding the future gently in mind while moving through the present. Some tools also show a quiet elegance in their making. A balanced hand axe or carefully struck flake reflects more than function alone. It can suggest satisfaction in competence, a standard of good work learned through repetition. Symmetry may help with use, yet it may also reveal that makers noticed proportion and control. This is not the same as decoration, but it does point to an appreciation of form. A well-made tool carries the calm of practiced hands. It shows that utility and care are not opposites. In many human activities, they settle naturally beside one another. Raw materials connected people to specific landscapes. Good stone had to be found, recognized, and sometimes carried over distance. Certain outcrops or riverbeds may have been revisited because they offered reliable material for cutting edges and points. When archaeologists find stone far from its source, they glimpse movement, exchange, or long memory. The object itself preserves a geography. It tells us that a tool begins before shaping begins. It starts with knowing where the earth offers what is needed, and remembering that place well enough to return when supplies run low. Repair likely mattered almost as much as creation. A damaged edge could be resharpened. A broken point might be reworked into a smaller implement. Handles, bindings, or shafts made from perishable materials could be replaced while the stone part remained useful. This practical economy gives tools a layered history. They change through use, becoming something slightly different from what they were at first. Where marks and retouch on old tools reflect that long companionship between people and objects. A useful implement was not always discarded when it changed. It was often adapted and asked to serve again. If we imagine a camp through its tools, we begin to see motion made visible. Someone shapes stone near the edge of the light. Someone tests a point before a hunt. Someone scrapes a hide while another cuts plant fibers for binding. Children watch and absorb the rhythm of practiced hands. In that setting, tools are not isolated artifacts. They are part of living scenes of labor, teaching, and repetition. The knowledge inside them is social. It moves from maker to observer, from elder to younger person, and from one day of work to the next. That is part of why tools remain so moving in the archaeological record. They are practical objects, yet they also preserve traces of foresight, habit, and human presence. A shaped edge is a small but durable sign that someone understood a material well enough to ask it for help. They also show how often intelligence appears in humble forms. A useful edge, made well and kept close, can carry an astonishing amount of planning within a very ordinary object. Tool traditions also spread. Similar methods appear across broad regions, sometimes lasting for immense spans of time. That continuity suggests learning within groups and perhaps exchange between groups as well. Not every community would have made identical choices, but certain approaches prove stable enough to endure. Over time, some traditions became more complex, involving prepared cores, more specialized forms, and greater planning depth. Complexity did not always move in one direction, and not every place changed at the same pace. Still, the general pattern shows humans becoming increasingly skilled at shaping materials in ways that matched many environments and tasks. So the tool story of early humans is both practical and deeply human. A tool is a thought made solid, then worn smooth by use. It reflects the hand that shaped it, the need that called it forth, and the quiet social world in which such skill was learned and remembered. Through tools, people extended their bodies, altered their surroundings, and carried a little more possibility into each day. And as those shaped objects gathered around hearths and camps, they joined another transformative force, one that warmed the night, changed food, and gently restructured the rhythm of human life: fire. Fire may be one of the most quietly powerful companions early humans ever gained. A small controlled flame could change the meaning of a place after sunset. It offered warmth in cool air, light in deepening darkness, and a center around which bodies could gather. Before fire, the night would have pressed close in ways modern people rarely experience. With fire, there was still darkness, still uncertainty, still distance beyond the circle of light, yet there was also a protected center, a glow that softened fear and extended wakefulness just a little beyond the fall of day. The earliest controlled use of fire is still debated in some cases, because traces can be difficult to interpret. Burned bone, reddened earth, charcoal, and heat-altered stone can suggest a hearth, but context matters. Natural fires occur too. Still, over time the record becomes clearer, and it is evident that many early humans learned not only to use fire, but to manage it. Management is the important word. A fire is never just found. It must be tended, fed, watched, and kept within limits. This turns flame from a passing event into a practical relationship. Warmth alone would have made a difference. Cooler nights, windy shelters, and seasonal cold all become more bearable when heat can be carried into camp. Fire may have helped some human groups expand into colder regions where resting through the night without warmth would be more difficult. A sheltered hearth could make the difference between enduring a place and settling there with some confidence. It is a quiet reminder that migration and adaptation are not only matters of courage or strength. Sometimes they depend on a small technology that changes what the body can tolerate after the sun has gone down. Then there is light. Firelight extends activity into evening, though probably not in the harsh, endless way of electric light. Its range is limited, flickering, warm, and uneven. It encourages closeness. People sitting near a hearth occupy the same pool of brightness, their attention gently drawn inward. Tasks that could be done by firelight, repairing a tool, preparing food, watching a child, speaking softly, became part of the evening rhythm. Beyond the glow, the world remained largely unseen. In that balance between illumination and surrounding dark, nightlife took on a different texture, still calm, but slightly widened. Cooked food may have been one of fire's deepest changes. Cooking softens many foods, releases calories more efficiently, and reduces some of the chewing effort required by raw material. Meat becomes easier to tear and digest. Roots and tubers become more edible. Seeds and grains, in later settings, become more useful when heated or processed with fire. This affects not only nutrition, but time, labor, and social interaction. Meals around a hearth unfold differently from food eaten cold and separately. Cooking asks for waiting, for gathering, for timing. It turns nourishment into an event with its own quiet rhythm. Smoke may also have played a role in camp comfort, especially where insects gathered near sleeping bodies. Though smoke can irritate the eyes and lungs, a carefully managed fire might reduce biting insects or deter some animals from coming too close. Such effects would have varied by place and season, but they help explain why fire became central not only to food, but to the practical arrangement of night. A fire is not merely a source of heat. It changes the atmosphere around a camp, shaping where people sit, how they rest, and how the space between bodies and wilderness is negotiated. Because fire must be maintained, it encourages shared responsibility. Someone gathers fuel. Someone notices when the coals are thinning. Someone protects the flame from rain or wind. In another moment, embers may be carried or preserved for later use, reducing the effort of creating a new fire from nothing. These routines create a form of cooperation that is quiet but constant. The fire asks for attention, and in answering that need, people may become more attuned to one another's movements. A hearth can organize social space not only because it gives comfort, but because it requires ongoing care. Archaeologists often identify ancient hearths through clusters of ash, charcoal, burned bone, and stones cracked by repeated heating. These remains can seem ordinary, yet they are deeply intimate traces. A hearth marks a place where people paused long enough to shape the night. They were not only passing through, they were arranging time, altering food, and creating a center. Sometimes several hearths in one site may suggest repeated occupation or different uses across time. Even when the fire itself is gone, its pattern remains in the ground like a memory of warmth that outlived the bodies who once sat nearby. Fire may also have gently enlarged the space for language, teaching, and reflection. Evening light slows the pace of labor. Tasks can still continue, but they do so in a more gathered atmosphere. Stories, instructions, memories of roots, and quiet observations about weather or animals may all have circulated near the glow. No one can say exactly what was spoken, but the conditions for sharing were there. In that sense, fire did not simply illuminate faces. It illuminated social life. It created a setting in which knowledge and feeling could travel softly between people at the end of the day. The sound of fire may have mattered too. A hearth crackles, settles, and shifts in gentle ways that draw attention without demanding it. In a world without mechanical noise, such sounds would become part of the evening atmosphere, mingling with low voices, breathing, wind, and distant animals beyond the camp. The glow and sound together create a kind of boundary, subtle but real, between inside and outside, between the gathered group and the larger darkness around it. This sensory change may be one reason fire feels so central in human memory. It changes the emotional texture of a place as much as its temperature. Fuel gathering must have shaped the day in practical ways. Wood, grass, dung, or other burnable materials had to be found, carried, and kept dry when possible. A dependable fire therefore tied camp life to the surrounding environment even more closely. People needed not only food and water, but enough combustible material to maintain warmth and cooking. This may have influenced where groups stayed and how long they remained. A hearth is comforting, yet it quietly depends on continued labor. Even warmth has its supply lines, and early humans would have understood that through ordinary repetition rather than abstraction. There is also a temporal quality to fire. A flame rises quickly, but embers last, and the management of those embers can carry warmth across the night or help begin the next day's fire with less effort. This gives the hearth a sense of continuity that spans sleeping and waking. A campfire at dusk is not only for that moment. It may also be for the coldest hour before dawn, for the morning meal, or for preserving a coal during travel. In this way, fire links one part of the day to another, quietly weaving time together through attention and care. When we imagine early humans seated near a hearth, we are not only imagining technology. We are imagining one of the first sustained ways people altered the night to meet their own needs. The fire does not remove darkness, but it makes darkness livable. It allows a group to remain together with a little more comfort, a little more conversation, and a little more control over its surroundings. That modest enlargement of safety may have changed human life as deeply as many more dramatic inventions that came much later. Its power is calm, local, and repeated, which may be why it endured so completely. In that sense, fire is both material and emotional. It cooks and warms, but it also gathers. It creates a center that people can orient themselves around at the end of the day. Few changes in early life seem to have touched so many parts of being human at once, and so quietly. Its power may be easiest to miss precisely because it became so familiar. Once fire entered daily life, many other habits could settle around it and grow more stable from night to night. The hearth made continuity easier to feel, because each evening it offered a small return to warmth, light, and shared presence. So when we consider fire in early human life, it helps to think beyond the flame itself. Fire changed food, shelter, migration, evening habits, and perhaps even the emotional shape of being together after dark. It did not remove hardship, but it made many forms of hardship more manageable. A hearth gave both heat and a point of return. Around it, the night could become slightly more human, slightly more shared, and slightly less exposed. And from that shared circle of warmth, it feels natural to move into the families and social bonds that helped early humans endure not just a night, but whole generations. Early humans did not live as isolated individuals moving alone through the world. For most, life likely unfolded within small groups shaped by kinship, cooperation, memory, and shared routine. Group living offered many practical advantages. It made care easier, improved safety, and allowed knowledge to accumulate across ages and abilities. A child could be watched while others gathered food. An injured person might still be fed. A skilled toolmaker could teach others. In a world filled with uncertainty, being part of a group did not remove hardship, but it made hardship more bearable and often more survivable. The exact size and structure of early human groups surely varied. Some may have been small bands that moved frequently. Others may have joined with neighboring groups at certain times of year before separating again. Population density was low in most ancient landscapes, so people may have spent long periods mostly among familiar faces. That familiarity matters. Repeated contact builds habits of trust, expectation, and response. One person learns another's pace, mood, strength, and skill. The social world becomes finely textured. It is composed not of abstractions, but of known voices, familiar gestures, and remembered roles. Children were central to this world. Human children grow slowly and require extended care, which means early communities likely depended on more than one caregiver. Parents, older siblings, grandparents, and unrelated adults may all have contributed in different ways. Shared care would help explain how children survived in mobile and demanding environments. It also created a setting for learning through presence. A child watching adults gather plants, shape tools, tend fire, or choose a campsite was already being introduced to the logic of the world. Teaching did not always need formal lessons. Much of it happened simply by living nearby. Older members of a group may have held especially valuable knowledge. They would remember routes to water, the timing of migrations, the location of useful stone, or the dangers of certain places. Experience is a form of stored landscape, and in uncertain environments that store can matter as much as physical strength. A quieter step, a patient eye, or a remembered path may save more energy than speed alone. It is comforting to imagine that age, when survived, had meaning beyond endurance itself. The longer a person lived, the more patterns they could hold, and the more calmly they might guide others through familiar cycles. Food sharing may have been one of the strongest threads holding groups together. When resources are uneven, sharing helps smooth risk. A hunter returning with meat, or gatherers returning with abundant plant food, could support others whose efforts that day brought less. This does not mean all sharing was perfectly equal or always voluntary. Social life is rarely so simple. Still, the broad pattern of shared access seems likely in many early human settings. Meals are often social even in the most practical societies. To eat together is to reinforce belonging, obligation, and the quiet sense that survival is not entirely individual. Conflict surely existed too. Groups may have faced internal tension, competition over mates, differences in skill or temperament, and occasional disputes over resources. Yet the very persistence of group living suggests that cooperation usually outweighed division. Many tasks were safer or more effective when done together. Looking out for one another during rest, traveling with companions, and helping the injured all point toward forms of social patience. In a way, every enduring group is a negotiation. It survives because enough people continue choosing shared life over separation, even when that shared life is imperfect. Some fossil evidence hints at care for injured or disabled individuals who lived long after an initial wound or condition. This is not proof of constant tenderness in every case, but it does suggest that some people were supported beyond their immediate productive value. That possibility matters. It implies a social world in which vulnerability could be met, at least sometimes, with attention rather than abandonment. The emotional tone of such care is impossible to recover, but the practical fact remains powerful. Survival after serious injury often requires others. In that simple requirement, we glimpse something deeply human and quietly enduring. Roles within a group were likely flexible, shaped by age, ability, condition, season, and local need. One person may have been especially skilled at toolmaking, another at finding edible plants, another at remembering routes, another at watching children or tending the fire. These roles need not have been rigid categories. In small communities, most people probably did many things. Still, repeated strengths would become known, and a kind of natural distribution of responsibility could emerge. This does not require formal hierarchy. It only requires memory, trust, and the willingness to rely on one another in ordinary ways. Social bonds were probably reinforced through touch, voice, proximity, and shared routine. Sitting near the same hearth, sleeping in familiar arrangements, walking known paths together, hearing the same sounds at dusk and dawn, all of this helps create emotional steadiness. Much of what makes a group feel secure may be quiet rather than dramatic. It lives in predictable actions and repeated presence. In another age without clocks or written rules, rhythm itself may have been one of the main structures of social life. The day unfolded, and people unfolded within it, side by side, in remembered patterns. Partnerships within these groups may have taken many forms, shaped by need, affection, kinship, and circumstance. Some relationships likely centered on shared childcare, others on shared work, others on companionship built through repeated movement and daily reliance. We cannot recover the emotional details, yet it seems reasonable to imagine that familiarity itself carried comfort. To know how another person moves, speaks, and responds in ordinary situations is a kind of security. In uncertain environments, emotional steadiness may grow less from grand declarations than from the repeated evidence that someone remains present and dependable. Groups may also have connected with other groups at intervals, exchanging mates, information, materials, or simply renewed social contact. Such gatherings could help widen networks beyond the immediate camp. They may have reduced isolation and allowed knowledge to spread across a larger region. Even if these meetings were occasional, they would matter. A wider social world offers resilience. It means that no small group exists entirely alone. Somewhere beyond the next ridge or valley, there may be others who share certain habits, recognize familiar gestures, or hold useful news about weather, animals, and routes. Shared life also means shared emotion, though we can only infer its forms. Relief after danger, sorrow after loss, pleasure in successful food gathering, pride in a well-made tool, affection toward children, and concern for the injured all likely existed in some combination. Early humans were not emotionally empty simply because they lived without writing. Their feelings may have been expressed through closeness, voice, ritual, and routine rather than through recorded words, but they still shaped group cohesion. Emotional life, like practical life, would have influenced who stayed near whom and how communities held together over time. Perhaps the most important point is that social life made knowledge durable. A single person's skill disappears quickly if no one else learns it. A remembered route fades if never shared. A way of tending fire, choosing shelter, or shaping stone becomes tradition only when repeated among others. In that sense, community is part of human memory itself. It keeps useful patterns alive beyond one lifetime. Early humans survived not only because individuals were capable, but because groups formed living containers for experience, passing it forward in ordinary acts of attention and care. What held those groups together was likely not one thing, but many small things repeated faithfully: sharing food, watching children, recalling routes, tending warmth, and returning to one another at the close of the day. Social life was built from those quiet repetitions. So the family and social life of early humans can be imagined as a web of practical care and mutual dependence. And from this soft web of cooperation, we can move naturally into another communal achievement: the slow development of communication, learning, and the early roots of language. Language is one of the most intimate parts of being human, yet its earliest history is among the hardest to see. Words do not fossilize. Sentences leave no direct imprint in stone. So when we ask how early humans communicated, we enter a quieter field of clues and careful inference. Scientists look at anatomy, brain development, social complexity, and tool learning to estimate what forms of communication may have been possible. The result is not certainty, but a gentle outline. Whatever early speech was like, it likely grew slowly, alongside gesture, rhythm, expression, and shared practical need. Even before fully developed language, gestures would have mattered. A pointed hand, a lifted chin, a warning motion, or a beckoning arm can carry meaning quickly. Facial expression and vocal tone do much the same. Early humans almost certainly lived in worlds rich with such signals. A child could be guided, a hunt coordinated, or danger indicated without many words. This reminds us that communication does not begin with grammar. It begins with attention shared between bodies. One person notices what another notices, and the gap between them narrows. Out of that simple alignment, more complex meaning can slowly emerge. Anatomical changes may also offer hints. The shape of the vocal tract, the control of breathing, and features of the skull and nervous system may all have influenced the range of sounds early humans could produce. These clues are partial and debated, yet they suggest that speech capacity did not appear all at once. It developed gradually, as did the social environments that made richer communication useful. A larger and more flexible repertoire of sounds would help with teaching, warning, planning, comforting, and remembering. In another sense, language may have expanded because early humans were already becoming more dependent on shared knowledge. Toolmaking offers one of the clearest windows into learning. A simple task can be copied by imitation alone, but a more complex sequence often benefits from demonstration and perhaps vocal guidance. Preparing stone, striking at the right angle, turning the core, and anticipating the final shape all require ordered attention. The spread of such techniques suggests that people were not merely inventing in isolation. They were transmitting skill. That transmission could happen through hands-on demonstration, through repeated observation, or through spoken instruction once language had developed far enough. However it happened, learning had become social and cumulative. Repetition was probably central to memory. A route to water, the shape of a useful stone, the signs of dangerous weather, or the timing of a migration could be reinforced again and again through use and telling. Language, if present in more developed form, would have made this easier. A name for a place, a term for a season, or a phrase for a kind of animal could help bind many experiences into a single shareable pattern. It is a quiet reminder that words do not merely describe the world. They help store it. They turn fleeting perception into something more stable and portable. Storytelling may have begun in similarly practical ways. A remembered hunt, a warning about a ravine, an account of where fruit ripened last season, or a description of a distant water source can all function as stories before they become art. Yet even practical stories carry rhythm. They arrange events in sequence. They preserve what matters and let the rest drift away. Around a hearth or during travel, these spoken patterns may have helped organize knowledge across generations. A child who hears a place described more than once begins to carry it internally before ever walking there alone. Language also shapes group identity. Shared sounds and meanings allow a community to coordinate with less confusion and to recognize itself as a community. The exact moment when this happened cannot be found, but the principle is gentle and clear. Communication draws people together by reducing uncertainty. It creates common reference points. It supports trust, instruction, and anticipation. In a world without maps or books, a shared spoken world may have been one of the most important social tools of all, linking memory to movement and feeling to action in steady, everyday ways. Children likely learned language as they learned everything else, through immersion in ordinary life. They heard repeated sounds attached to repeated actions. They watched expressions and outcomes. They joined tasks gradually and absorbed vocabulary through context. No classroom was needed. The world itself served as a patient teacher. This kind of learning is slow and embodied. A word for water means more when spoken at the edge of a stream. A warning means more when it accompanies a dangerous place. Communication grows stronger when tied to felt experience, and early human life would have offered that connection constantly. Perhaps what is most moving is that language, even in its earliest forms, may have widened the interior world. Once people can name, compare, recall, and imagine together, time itself feels different. The past becomes easier to share. The future becomes easier to anticipate. Feelings can be soothed, instructions can be refined, and identity can be spoken into shape. This does not require a modern vocabulary. Even modest linguistic ability can transform social life. It allows the mind of one person to rest, for a moment, inside the attention of another, and that is a profound form of closeness. Silence would still have remained important. Not every part of communication is filled with words. Pauses, glances, waiting, and listening all shape meaning. In early human life, where attention to the environment mattered greatly, silence may have carried practical value as well as emotional value. It is possible to imagine a group moving quietly, then speaking softly once danger has passed or the evening fire is settled. Language does not erase silence. It gives silence a companion. Together they form the rhythm of communication, one offering sound, the other offering space in which sound can be noticed more clearly. Naming may have been one of the great subtle powers of language. To give a recurring place or creature a stable sound is to make it easier to remember, discuss, and anticipate. A water source becomes more mentally secure when it can be named. A season becomes easier to compare when it can be referred to consistently. Even if early vocabularies were limited by modern standards, they could still dramatically increase the precision of shared thought. Language makes patterns easier to carry. It turns experience into something the group can hold together rather than alone. The emotional use of language matters too. A voice can calm fear, invite patience, or reassure a child. It can warn sharply or soothe gently. These social uses of speech may have been as important as technical instruction. In communities where cooperation was essential, the ability to regulate feeling through sound and rhythm would strengthen bonds. A familiar voice near a hearth, during travel, or after injury may have offered comfort long before anyone developed abstract terms for emotion. Tone itself carries meaning, and tone may have been one of the oldest bridges between inner state and shared life. Over time, communication likely became one of the main ways human life escaped the limits of any single moment. A useful event could be remembered in words, then carried elsewhere. A place not yet seen could be described. A warning from the past could shape future behavior. In that sense, language stretches reality. It lets memory travel farther and allows imagination to work in concert with practical need. This quiet expansion may be one of the most important developments in human history, because from it grow teaching, planning, storytelling, ritual, and the layered symbolic worlds that follow. The growth of language did not make life less physical. It joined the physical world more closely to memory and relation. A spoken word could accompany a gesture, a route, a tool, or a ritual act, helping experience settle more deeply and travel more widely through the group. In that quiet joining of sound and experience, human communities gained a new way to keep the world near, even when the moment itself had already passed. Speech allowed absence, memory, and possibility to be held more gently within the group. So the story of language and learning in early humans is not a tale of sudden invention. It is a slow widening of connection. Gestures become more layered. Sounds become more organized. Skills are taught with greater precision. Memory becomes easier to carry from one body to another. In that quiet growth, human communities become more than groups who live near one another. They become groups who can think together. And from that shared interior space of speech, symbol, and memory, we can move toward another subtle realm of human life, the world of art, ritual, meaning, and belief. At some point in early human life, objects began to carry meaning beyond immediate survival. A mark on stone, a shell worn as an ornament, a careful burial, or a painted wall suggests a mind turning toward symbolism. This does not mean that practical life disappeared. Food, shelter, and safety remained essential. But alongside those needs, there emerged signs of reflection, identity, memory, and perhaps reverence. The record is uneven, and interpretations remain cautious, yet the presence of symbolic behavior feels quietly significant. It suggests that early humans were not only surviving the world, they were also giving it meaning. Cave paintings are among the most striking examples, though they belong mostly to later prehistoric chapters. Animals, abstract signs, and handprints appear on stone surfaces in places where darkness, echo, and depth already create a special atmosphere. No one can say with certainty why every image was made. Some may relate to ritual. Some may support storytelling or teaching. Some may mark a place as important. Perhaps several purposes overlapped. What matters for our calm reflection is that image-making required intention. It asked a person to pause, select pigment, choose a surface, and leave a sign meant to endure at least a little while. Pigments such as red ochre appear in many archaeological contexts. They may have been used on bodies, hides, objects, or surfaces. Ochre can also have practical uses, so symbolism should not be assumed in every case. Still, repeated collection and use of colored materials hints at a growing sensitivity to appearance and shared meaning. Color draws attention. It can set apart the ordinary from the special. A small amount of pigment rubbed into skin or onto an object may have signaled affiliation, status, mood, or participation in a ritual act. Even if we do not know the message, the act of marking matters. Personal ornaments offer another quiet window. Shell beads, perforated teeth, carved pendants, or carefully selected objects suggest that some early humans chose to wear meaning on the body. Ornament can express identity, beauty, group belonging, or personal memory. It can also turn an ordinary material into a social sign. A shell from a distant coast, carried inland and worn near the chest, says something about movement, value, and intention. Such objects often require labor to collect and shape, which means they mattered enough to justify effort. That effort is itself a form of evidence for inner life. Burial practices can be especially moving to consider. In some sites, bodies appear to have been placed with care, sometimes with objects, pigments, or particular positions that suggest more than simple disposal. Interpretations must be careful, because nature can alter remains in misleading ways. Yet where deliberate burial is likely, it hints at memory and social feelings surrounding death. To bury someone is to mark their absence. It is to spend time on a body that can no longer contribute to daily work. In that gesture there may be grief, respect, ritual, or all three resting quietly together. Symbolic behavior did not appear identically in every region or every human group. Traditions likely varied greatly. Some communities may have emphasized ornament. Others may have used particular places for painting or ritual. Others may have left only faint traces that archaeology cannot yet recognize. This variety matters because it keeps us from imagining a single universal path. Meaning is always local as well as human. It grows in relation to landscape, memory, and social structure. The signs left behind are few, but they suggest many different ways of making the world feel inhabited not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Art may also have worked as a form of memory. An image, a repeated pattern, or a marked object can hold stories that words alone might not preserve. A child shown the same sign again and again may learn not only what it depicts, but what it implies. Symbols condense experience. They gather many associations into one visible form. This makes them useful in societies where information travels mostly through speech and repeated practice. Perhaps that is one reason symbols appear so persistently across human history. They offer a quiet anchor, a place where memory can settle and remain shareable. Belief, of course, is harder still to reconstruct. We cannot know exactly what early humans thought about death, animals, dreams, weather, or the hidden forces of the world. Yet symbolic acts suggest that some realities were treated as more than practical. A cave might feel sacred. An animal image might carry power. A burial might express continuity beyond physical life. Even if these beliefs were simple by later standards, they would still matter profoundly. Belief does not need formal theology to shape behavior. It only needs a sense that the world contains meaning not fully explained by immediate survival. There is something deeply restful in recognizing that symbolic life is ancient. The desire to mark, remember, decorate, honor, and imagine did not begin with cities or books. It seems to have roots far back in human experience. This reminds us that inner life is not a modern luxury. Wonder, reflection, and ritual may have accompanied people through long ages of difficulty. Around fires, inside caves, beside graves, and through small ornaments worn close to the body, early humans made room for meanings that could not be eaten or carried in a toolkit, yet still mattered enough to preserve. Certain places may have gathered special significance through repeated use. A cave chamber with paintings, a burial area, or a place where pigments were prepared could become more than merely functional. It might carry memory, mood, or ritual expectation. Human beings often attach feeling to place, and there is no reason to think early humans were different in that basic respect. A landscape can hold stories. A marked wall can preserve presence. A site revisited over generations can become part of how a group understands itself. In that way, symbol and geography often meet and deepen one another. Objects associated with belief or identity may also have helped regulate emotion. An ornament worn close to the body can comfort by familiarity alone. A repeated mark can reassure because it connects the present moment to earlier moments of belonging. Ritual actions may calm uncertainty by giving shape to events that would otherwise feel overwhelming, especially death, danger, or transition. Even simple symbolic acts can have powerful social effects. They gather attention, organize feeling, and remind a community that experience has meaning beyond the immediate pressure of survival. It is important, though, to keep a gentle humility in interpretation. Archaeologists can observe pigments, graves, beads, and images, but they cannot hear the exact explanations once given for them. A sign may mean several things at once. A burial may combine practicality with ritual. A painted animal may teach, honor, remember, or invoke. This uncertainty does not diminish symbolic life. It preserves its depth. Meanings are often layered even in the present, and there is no reason to assume the ancient past was simpler. The inner world of early humans may have been subtle in ways evidence can only partly suggest. Still, the presence of symbolism changes how we imagine prehistory. It means ancient people did not move through life only as problem solvers responding to hunger and weather. They also paused to mark, to remember, to beautify, and to wonder. These are quiet acts, but they enlarge the human picture enormously. They show that long before written myths and formal temples, there were already gestures toward memory, identity, and mystery. The world of early humans was practical, certainly, but it was not empty of feeling. It contained room for inward life, and that room may have been essential to being human. Once symbols appear, the human story gains another layer of softness. Survival remains necessary, yet it is no longer the whole frame. Meaning begins to gather around objects, places, bodies, and memories. And in that gathering we recognize a deeply familiar part of ourselves reaching back into very old time. It is a quiet but profound shift. The world is no longer only used. It is also interpreted, remembered, and gently marked with significance. So art and belief in early human life are best understood as quiet expansions of awareness. They show people attending not only to necessity, but to memory, identity, beauty, and perhaps mystery. These traces do not solve the past. They deepen it. They suggest that ancient lives contained inwardness as well as action. And from that inward realm of symbols and ritual, it is natural to turn outward again, toward movement across landscapes, migrations into new regions, and the long changes that carried different human groups through an ever-shifting world. The story of early humans is also a story of movement. Long before roads, borders, or maps, small groups traveled across landscapes in search of water, food, shelter, stone, and more favorable conditions. Some movements were short and seasonal, returning to familiar places when rain came or animals migrated. Others unfolded over many generations, carrying populations into entirely new environments. Migration did not happen as one grand march. It happened in stages, pauses, returns, and renewed departures. In that sense, movement was not an exception in early human life. It was one of the ordinary ways life continued. Africa was the deep center of early human development, and many movements took place within it long before some populations spread farther. Rivers, grasslands, lake margins, forest edges, and shifting climate zones all shaped these internal journeys. A drying region might encourage departure. A newly fertile corridor might invite settlement. Travel would often follow the logic of resources rather than abstract curiosity. People moved where life could be sustained. Yet in doing so, they also carried skills, habits, genes, and memories from one place to another, slowly weaving a wider human pattern across the continent. When some human groups expanded into Eurasia, they encountered new conditions, colder climates, unfamiliar animals, different seasonal rhythms, and altered light. Such movements required adaptation, and not all happened at the same time. Several human species, including Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans, occupied parts of Eurasia across long overlapping periods. These were not empty lands waiting quietly for one arrival. They were already inhabited by close relatives with their own histories. Migration therefore included meeting as well as moving, and those meetings could involve exchange, competition, coexistence, and even into breeding. Travel routes were often guided by practical geography. Water sources provide direction and repeated access to life. Animal paths hint at movement through usable terrain. Valleys, coastlines, and open corridors offer easier passage than mountains or deserts without resources. Coastal routes may have been especially important for some populations because shorelines can provide food, orientation, and relatively continuous travel space. The coast is a patient guide. It curves, opens, narrows, and invites progress without demanding straight lines. In a way, geography itself was one of humanity's earliest companions in long-distance movement. Climate changed these routes repeatedly. During ice ages, sea levels fell, exposing land bridges in some regions and joining areas now separated by water. In warmer periods, rising seas closed those pathways again. Glacier advanced and retreated. Grasslands expanded, then shrank. Forests shifted. Human migration must be imagined within this restless environmental frame. People did not move across a fixed map. They moved through worlds that opened and closed around them over centuries. A route available to one generation might be gone for another. A hospitable valley might become dry, cold, or difficult in time. Movement did not always mean permanent departure. Many groups likely followed seasonal rounds, returning to the same broad territory year after year. A river crossing, a cave shelter, a flint source, or a feeding ground could become part of a known circuit. This kind of pattern mobility is different from wandering without direction. It reflects memory anchored in landscape. People knew not only where they were, but where they had been before and where they might go next when the season changed. Such movement has a rhythm to it, almost like breathing, expansion and return, distance and homecoming. When groups encountered one another, the results could be subtle or profound. They might exchange techniques, materials, ornaments, or mating partners. Genetic evidence now shows that modern humans interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans in parts of Eurasia. This means the human story is not simply a sequence of replacements. It also includes blending. The traces of those meetings remain in living people today, though quietly and unevenly. In another sense, migration is always relational. No group moves into a world without also moving into networks of plants, animals, climates, and sometimes other humans already present there. Travel into new landscapes affected nearly every part of life. Diet had to adjust to unfamiliar plants and animals. Shelter needed to suit new weather. Clothing, fire use, and movement patterns may all have shifted in response to colder or wetter conditions. Knowledge that worked well in one region might need revision in another. This capacity to adapt without losing continuity is one of the most striking features of early humans. They carried enough flexibility to learn from place while still preserving traditions of toolmaking, social care, and communication as they moved through immense distances. It is perhaps tempting to think of migration only in large-scale terms, but every great movement is made of smaller acts. Someone decides to follow a river farther than before. A group sleeps one night beyond familiar ground. Children grow up treating a new valley as ordinary. Elders compare a new region with remembered places elsewhere. Slowly, without proclamation, the map of human life widens. What later appears to us as expansion would have felt, in the moment, like a series of practical decisions shaped by weather, hunger, caution, and curiosity held in careful balance. Movement also changes how memory works. A place left behind does not vanish at once. It remains in stories, habits, and comparisons. A new shelter may be judged against an old one. A new food may remind someone of another season in another land. In this way, migration creates layered landscapes within the mind. People live in the present environment while carrying traces of earlier places. That internal geography may have helped early humans decide where to return, what to avoid, and what conditions felt promising when entering unknown territory. For children, migration could feel different from how it felt to elders. A child raised in a new region may treat its weather, animals, and terrain as normal, while older members of the group remember other conditions and measure change more sharply. This means that movement unfolds not only across land, but across generations of perception. What begins as adaptation for one age group may become simple familiarity for the next. Over time, the new place settles into daily life so completely that the memory of having arrived there begins to fade. Not every movement led to success. Some routes would have ended in harsh conditions, dead ends, or losses that left little trace behind. Migration should therefore be imagined with humility, not as inevitable triumph, but as repeated experimentation under uncertain conditions. Some groups found ways to continue. Others likely disappeared. Yet even this uncertainty adds to the calm realism of the story. Human expansion across the world was not guaranteed. It depended on small decisions made well enough, often enough, over long stretches of time. Endurance grew from many fragile moments handled with care. What remains most striking is the balance between continuity and change. Early humans moved into new regions, met new relatives, and adapted to unfamiliar climates, yet they carried recognizable forms of social life, tool use, and shared knowledge with them. They did not begin from nothing in each place. They arrived with memory already in motion. That continuity may be why migration feels less like rupture and more like unfolding. The path changes, the weather changes, the neighbors change, but the quiet human pattern of observing, adjusting, and continuing remains. Seen gently, migration is almost another form of learning. Each journey asks what can be carried forward and what must change. Early humans answered those questions not in theory, but in shelter choices, food habits, fire use, and the steady willingness to keep moving when conditions called for it. For that reason, travel belongs at the center of the early human story rather than at its edge. Movement was one of the main ways people met change and slowly made new worlds livable. So the long movement of early humans across changing lands is not a tale of conquest in a later sense. It is a tale of adaptation, endurance, and repeated beginnings. People traveled because landscapes changed, because resources shifted, because opportunities appeared, and because the human way of living had always included motion. In that patient movement, different groups met, separated, blended, and left traces in one another. The world of early humans was never still, yet its changes were often gradual enough to feel almost like drifting. And that gentle sense of drift is a fitting place to let the whole story come to rest.